Hi, thank you so much again. We're just going to mirror everybody else's sentiment about what a wonderful opportunity it is to be part of this community and to write this chapter. My name is Maya Israel. I'm an associate professor of ed tech at the University of Florida. As part of the Creative Technology Research Lab, my co-author Todd's going to introduce himself as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Todd Lash. I am also part of CTRL, except for I am part of CTRL up north at the University of Illinois, where I'm a graduate student in the Department of Special Education and a 2020 Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellow.
So as you can see from this title slide, we wrote a chapter about universal design for learning in computer science education. So kind of the first question was, what will teachers get out of this? What we found is a lot of teachers who we work with have heard about universal design for learning, but they don't know how to apply it within the context of computer science education. So even if they are familiar with it in the context of math education or science education or whatnot, what does it look like in this particular context is new to them. The other part is that we want teachers to know about, even though my background, and Todd just mentioned special education, is working with students with disabilities. The idea of universal design for learning is not about students with disabilities. It's about proactively planning for the range of diverse learners that are in your classrooms. So knowing from the get-go that all students, like whoever said CS for all, Dan said that earlier, right? We really do want to create instructional activities that don't otherize children. So whereas before we would have like, here's a lesson for the quote unquote average child, now we have to make something different for an other, whether that student needs an enrichment activity or that student needs some additional support. The idea of universal design for learning is that it's a framework that allows us to think very proactively about the range of students. So the chapter has that kind of basic UDL, how does it apply within CS education, and some examples. So I think, Todd, you're going to talk about one of those list of examples.
Yeah, so when we think about introducing our chapter and kind of think about what are some of the key takeaways, Maya kind of hinted at this, but the basic idea behind the chapter is that learner variability is the norm. And that's the way that we should approach CS education. And really that variability is a strength. There is no such thing as an average learner. So how do we design instruction that has that flexibility and is not always designed for this kind of mythical average in the middle, right? And so UDL gives us a framework by which we can do that. What you're seeing here is this is a table that we've adapted the original UDL table from the Center for Assistive and Special Technologies, CAST, that was a more of a general look at UDL across multiple disciplines. This is one that we've developed specifically for computer science education. And one of the cool things about this is, and this is only a small part of it, this is a living document. And so you might see it over the course of the next year or 2 years, and it keeps growing. It's crowdsourced. So every time we do a professional development session or we do a presentation, we ask the participants to help us continue to populate this. And so again, we bring the community into developing how we can implement universal design in terms of computer science education. Let's see here. So one of the other things, a major takeaway, is we're thinking about trying to identify barriers that are present in curriculum and tools and materials that we utilize, and knowing that those barriers, the barriers are not about the kids, the barriers are about those curriculums and tools and pedagogies, right? It's how are we disabling instruction and how can we enable it by thinking about flexible frameworks like UDL.
So one of the ways that we do this is, so Todd just mentioned these 3 different universal design for learning principles, and there are a lot of ways of enacting them. But from a pedagogical perspective, we don't want teachers to just go to that crowdsourced document. We want them to think about what it is that they want to teach. And so starting off with thinking about what are my instructional goals? What do I hope the students can get out of this? And then oftentimes we then flip that in terms of student facing language. So when Carla and Katie were talking about kind of this integrated materials, we created things like I can statements out of that. And then once you have the goals, we think about what are the barriers to students achieving those goals. And then once we've really thought about that, then we can use those, these 3 universal design for learning principles to specifically think about who are the students in the classroom, what are my goals, what are the barriers, and how can I address those barriers. So the focus really is on the pedagogy and then using these 3 principles within them. And I'll just kind of end by saying that the chapters that we've heard about, these are really fantastic pedagogies. And what I would urge folks to do is to think about how might we think about inclusive practices within all of these. And so UDL is one of those frameworks to think about. So when you're talking about recursion or conditional logic or whatnot, or pair programming, there are ways to think about inclusive practices as compared to those that exclude particular children. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Maya and Todd.